Welcome back to another spoiler review. Notice how I didn't say quick review. That's because this video is going to be literally anything but quick. Today, we are talking about the Red Rising trilogy. The first three books, Red Rising, Golden Sun, and Morning Star. We're going to be talking about these three books. Um, Originally, I was, going to do just one quick review, one book, and then another book, and then the last book, and then I think halfway through, I started reading. I got halfway through Golden Sun and completely forgot to review Red Rising. So we're just going to review all of them at once and call it a spoiler review, like my Superman review from about a month ago now. So yeah, for a bit of context, as I like to do, I got into or got back into reading earlier this year. I love I love books growing up. As usual, I'm an English major. My goal is to write books, but I kind of fell out of love with actually reading. And I figured, going back into college for English, might as well get back into reading just so I can help myself in regards to my writing. So I scoured TikTok, scoured Twitter, YouTube, literally every social media site for a series, individual books, and whatnot. Put them all on a wheel and spun the wheel to see what I got. Left it up to chance to see what series I would get. And what do we know? What do you know? Surprise, surprise. The first thing that the wheel landed on was the Stormlight Archive. Crazy. Um, so I did that. Read all three Stormlight books, and read the first three Stormlight books, and then I decided I wanted to take a break. So I think I was about halfway through Oathbreaker when I spun the wheel again. And what do you know? The next book series that I landed on, and the next book on the Book Talk Bro, in quotation marks, stereotype. I don't know. I don't care. We landed on Red Rising. So yeah, I bought the first book. I started that after Oathbringer and didn't. I fully expected to go back to Starlight after reading the first Red Rising book, but that did not happen. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about these three books individually. I'm going to be going through each one and explaining how I feel about this. So let's get started. So let's start with Red Rising. This is definitely going to be the book that I talk about the least. I think this book is great. Don't get me wrong. I think it is great, but it's definitely my least favorite of the trilogy. I think the beginning of the book is really, really good, and everything leading into the Institute is great. I love everything with Darrow and Io, and Darrow's carving and learning the ways of the golds. And I think all of that works. I think all of that is great. However, some of my issues with this book, in general, have to ultimately do with the Institute. First, the overall genre shift was very jarring, and how it starts as a very sci-fi book, and from everything from the mines to this futuristic technology and you know uh, a slave rebellion story in a sci-fi setting. That's not uncommon, right? Um, and then it leads you on, fooling you into thinking that this is a sci-fi book, but then it switches to very much sci-fi fantasy in a sense. I guess that would be the best way to call it. I'm not sure what that genre would be called specifically, but if I were to call it anything, it's sci-fi fantasy with like castles and horses and medieval aspects. It's like mixed with the Hunger Games as well. And I'm not saying that it's like a bad thing because I think when you go back on it, it's pretty good. But it just kind of threw me off. It was so jarring to the point where I slowed down on my reading. Red Rising book one took me a month to finish, just because I wasn't as into it as I later would be. The first two parts of Red Rising, up to like maybe halfway through part three, took me so long to get through, just because I wasn't really into it. I think a lot of that does have to do with it. Um, in hindsight, I love that decision. I think it's I won't say unique just because I haven't read any much else in regards to sci-fi and whatnot. But in the moment, it was very, very weird. Next thing, suspensions of disbelief. How I describe Red Rising is how I describe The Promised Neverland, right? Even if there are golds there that are more enhanced and capable than the average red or, copper, green, silver, blue, pink, whatever. Even if there are golds that are more enhanced and more capable than the average red, and they're geniuses that made it into the Institute to begin with, you are insane if you expect me to believe that a whole bunch of teenagers from the ages of like 15 to 18, some older, some younger, I don't remember, are coming up with war tactics and whatnot. I love The Promised Neverland, right? I really do. Season 1 and the manga specifically. I mean, we don't talk about season 2. And I was thinking, what I was thinking throughout the entirety of that series was, for the sake of this really good story, I will allow it. And that's for the sake of this. That's the same for this. For the sake of this really, really good story that's being told, I'll allow it. However, there are certain moments where I'm like, all right, you lost me. I understand the society and, being enhanced and being ultra smart and whatnot. I get it. But I think we're suspending my disbelief a little too much, right? Where I'm like, this is dumb. But for the sake of the book, and I'm really glad that I didn't let it throw me off as much. I'm glad that I've read other stuff and that's allowed me to suspend my disbelief. For the sake of the book, I just let it go, and I enjoyed the book more for it, I guess. And lastly, and this isn't an Institute thing, this is a book thing. Man, the writing of this book can be really weird at times, considering it is Pierce Brown's first book. And I'm glad I pushed through, because, man, this book's writing between how Darrow talks and how certain things are described is better than what I can do. But I can still acknowledge that it is so weird at times. And, as, he writes more, and as more books come out, as the more you read through, Golden Sun on Morningstar, you definitely see that improvement, especially going into Golden Sun, but we'll get there. And then moving on to the positives, and this is something I'll lightly touch on here because I want to go into more detail when I talk about the other books. The characters. All amazing in some way, shape, or form. All have different personalities, different upbringings that play a part in pushing the story, both in this book and in future books going forward. Characters like, Pax, Quinn, Leah, Titus, for better or for worse, Antonia, also for better or for worse, the Proctors, everyone was unique in some way. I loved it. They all had their role to play in pushing Darrow as a character forward. And that's not even mentioning, the main characters who are obviously phenomenal. Obviously there's Darrow, Cassius, Severo, Rogue, Mustang, all of those characters that just really sold this book for me. I feel like if Red Rising didn't have as interesting characters to me, as interesting characters as these, I definitely wouldn't have enjoyed it. I definitely probably wouldn't have read the second book, just because I genuinely fell in love with all of these characters. And the last thing I want to talk about, I said this would be short, the world. I love the world that was being built, and while I do think that going from this to Golden Sun was a tad bit overwhelming at times, it properly sets up the systems and ideas of the world as a whole, as well as the stakes going forward, and I love that. Overall, Red Rising was really good. Despite, my issues aside, it's a book I would highly recommend, and I'm so glad I did push through it. Even if getting through it took longer than I would have wanted. This overall is a 8 out of 10 book for me. Like I said, some things could be better, some things took me out of it for a little bit, but it's still like a strong 8 out of 10. I really, really enjoyed it. Alright, next let's talk about Golden Sun, which is an action-packed book from start to finish. Pierce Brown's writing is so much better in this book, and it shows. In fact, it was so much better that it inspired me to go back and keep writing a story that I've been working on for like 2 years now. That's how much I love this book and how much it did for me. A lot of Golden Sun, or what I'm talking about Golden Sun, so I'm going to be talking about specifically Darrow, because I think Darrow's arc in this book is so good. Darrow anger. Let's start with that. Daryl's anger in regards to EO is so fascinating to me, as that anger evolves and takes different stages over the course of the book. Obviously, at Red Rising, for the most part, it was blind rage and determination. And in this book, you see him struggling with that anger. On one hand, you see Darrow so close with Augustus and his interactions with the Sovereign, her knights, and the Bologna family, which drives that anger. And on the other hand, you see Darrow making mistakes and the cost of those mistakes, which makes him not second guess what he's doing, but questioning his methods in a sense. He still has that drive to do what he does, but it's his methods that he starts questioning. And you can see him, and this actually starts in Red Rising with characters like Severo, Rogue Pax, and especially Mustang, starting to see golds and other colors in a more human way, exemplified by how he treats Ragnar. A way that says not all of them are bad. And while unfortunately that kind of bites him in the ass at the end, it's a really important part of his arc in this book and going forward, as well as his perception of Io. Because Io gets treated as a martyr. A lot to the point where Darrow puts her up on this pedestal. And the book never lets you forget about her. The book never, ever lets you forget about Io. But it also does a good job at humanizing her, even though she's been dead for so long now. You learn about her being pregnant. Above all else, she's just a girl that suffered from oppression. She was far from perfect, and that realization, I think, is what allows Darrow's development to continue. He realizes that Io, realistically didn't know about everything that was going on. She's she's just a girl that was scared, right? That allows him to open up more and put his trust into others more. You can definitely see that in his relationships with both Severo and Mustang. Obviously, Severo knew about Darrow before everything in this book had happened. But how he handled it speaks to Severo as a character. I really love Severo Red Rising. I love how insane he is. He's chaos incarnate. If Severo has three options in front of him, three options of things to do, he will ask what's the craziest thing he could possibly do and pick that one. He's insane. I love it. I also love how loyal he is and how much he cares. You can see that with the Howlers and even characters like Quinn and what happens to her in this book. He's a character that, regardless of how insane and angry and irrational he can be, aka the first 30% of Morningstar, regardless of all that, he is someone who can be trusted and someone who cares. And regardless of your color, which of course plays into his backstory, he will be there, and that's a friend that Darrow desperately needs, especially at certain points in this book. Moving on to Mustang. Mustang solidifies herself as a strong heroine. Unironically, outside of Darrow, she's probably my favorite character. She's witty, strong, and caring, and smart. And Darrow having to realize these things, the things that she's capable of throughout the book, is one of my favorite parts. She's genuinely the MVP of this book, causing Darrow to open up and continue his development. But him aside, she also has some amazing moments herself, like, the gala, which that entire sequence was amazing, but I digress. The gala is great, and her, manipulating Cassius and working with Darrow throughout the entirety of the book, all the way to her moment with Darrow and Ragnar and Lycos. That entire confrontation, just reading that back and forth, the thing that the book has been building up for so long, it was just outstanding. It was awesome. And then the ending, man. I don't want to sit here forever, so I want to kind of cut this short, because realistically, I could talk about Golden Sun for hours. It's my favorite book of the trilogy. But the ending is amazing. You see different characters, what they meant to Darrow, his motivations in characters like Augustus, his mentors, characters like Lauren, and someone who trusted him to rise and, make a difference, i.e. Fitchner. And you see the downfall of all of them due to Darrow's actions, as well as the actions of, a variety of different things as well, but specifically due to Darrow's actions. His deception, his past, and his actions all come back to haunt him at the end. I especially love everything done with Fitchner, because first, it makes Red Rising make a lot more sense. Both in who he actually is as Ares. This is a spoiler review. I don't have to. Yeah, spoilers. Um, but as well as um, he was the connection between a lot of the characters and their motivations. Outside of Darrow, he's really what pushes the story forward. And then, bam, head in the box, which of course leads to Severo's arc in Morningstar. You see the Bologna family and Cassius and their allies, whether it be Antonio or the Sovereign or the Jackal, see how far they'll go to take him down because of what he did to Julian. And then Rogue, man, who I'll go more into detail about him when I talk about Morningstar. But seeing that entire thing unfold was so sad. But ultimately, it did make sense. And also, it makes sense. It's one of those things where, as much as I don't like it, as much as upsetting as like the last 5 pages of Golden Sun made me, it's not like it came out of the blue. It's something that definitely built up over time, and I love it. I hate it. I love it. You also see that Pierce Brown is an evil, evil man who I hate because I can't believe that he would put me through this, as well as some of the things in Morningstar. But I digress. All in all, without going overboard, Golden Sun was an action-packed book with amazing dialogue that expanded this world and its takes and ideas masterfully, but also told a really rich story with its characters that ultimately caused it to be my favorite of the trilogy. And that's what solidified my love for this series, these characters, and this world. It also showed me that, once again, Pierce Brown is a terrible person who should never be trusted. But yeah, this book is outstanding. It is a 10 out of 10 for me. And I cannot wait to eventually reread it, because I absolutely will do that. Alright, lastly, we have Morningstar. I definitely started to appreciate Morningstar more when I started taking notes. And I'll explain why. I wasn't the biggest fan of the beginning portions of the book. Outside of, everything, a lot of the beginning portions after Darrow had been rescued. It felt boring at times, and it felt like it could drag. And I definitely still think that. I also understand why it's all there, to build out this world and conflict more obviously, but also to build up Darrow as a character. I love Darrow's evolution as a character. How he grows to become more compassionate, and even with all the troubles he faces, his confrontations with Cassius and Rogue being great examples, he still makes mistakes and still allows himself to be semi-human in a sense. His relationships with characters like Severo, Mustang, or Ragnar at an all-time high in this book. You can see how much Darrow's friends mean to him, how characters like Mustang ground him, and ultimately makes him realize how he feels about characters like Cassius and Rogue, characters who were friends with him but ultimately betrayed him. I think that's illustrated best in chapter 37. You can see how much these characters affect him. That first confrontation with Rogue in chapter 37, since the end of Golden Sun. That entire chapter was incredible, written amazingly by Pierce Brown, but especially at the end when Darrow is talking to Rogue. You can see that Rogue, even though he does believe that he truthfully believes what he says about golds and reds, he has an extra hate for Darrow for infiltrating their society and for what happened to Leah and Quinn. And you can see how that affects Rogue, but also Darrow, even if it's not explicitly stated. Darrow had an effect on Rogue, like Nero had an effect on Darrow, which is why I think the quote, "death begets death begets death," is one of the most powerful quotes from the franchise. And then you see Darrow's, over the span of the book, you see Darrow's evolution in regards to golds, which started in Golden Sun, and even going back to Red Rising, leading him to trust not just gold, but all colors more. You see how he sees himself in other people, and for better or for worse, he uses that. He trusts people he realistically shouldn't, which leads me into my next point. Cassius, whose character arc is also amazing because it's clear that he's a victim of the system, which is something that both he and Darrow realizes and sees, ultimately causing them to work together at the end. Obviously, being manipulated by Octavia aside, Cassius is a character that over the course of the 3 books realizes that everyone is affected by the systems put in place long before their time, from the Reds and the Mines to even the Golds. Darrow and Julian being prime examples of that. Everything he does is for honor in a system that, even as a Gold, wrongs him, which opens his eyes and makes it so he finally wants to live for himself. And I love that arc because all that makes it even more satisfying at the end with the final confrontation with Octavia and Asia. It was rough leading up there. Pierce Brown kind of made me upset for a little bit, but that final confrontation was so good, and I definitely see how it sets up. I can definitely see how it sets up the future with characters like Lysander. I imagine will be a big part of the next couple of books, I would think. Like I said, I wasn't the biggest fan of the first 2 acts because it felt messy and boring at times. But when it hits, it really hits. To run through, especially with the Valkyries, Ragnar, Darrow and Mustang's reunion of sorts, everything with Quicksilver, Several's arc, the escape from the Jackal, seeing Darrow's family again. And then obviously the latter half of the book is outstanding with so many twists and turns and instances of Pierce Brown trying to kill his readers. It was an amazing end to the trilogy, and I was really scared that wouldn't be the case. I was really scared that going into it, I was like, maybe this ending will fall flat and whatnot. It doesn't. And I'm so happy that was wrong. This book is like a 9 out of 10. Like I said, I have some issues. Going from a 10 out of 10 book that is Golden Sun to a 9 out of 10 to Morning Star was always going to be tough. But I still genuinely loved my time with this. It might even be a 9.5 out of 10. Love my time with this book. Ends the first trilogy perfectly, and I just cannot wait to read more. Before I end this review, I want to talk about some things regarding the series as a whole, not just concentrating on a particular book. First, the villains. All menacing and scary. There was rarely a time where one of these villains were around that my heart wasn't beating out of my chest. Octavia, Asia, however you pronounce her name, the Jackal, Cassie's for a while, the Bellonas, Roke for a while, the Proctors, Antonia. Despite how much I hated a lot of these characters, they made their presence known, solidifying themselves as great villains. I don't think there was really one in there that fell flat for me. If there was, I don't remember them. Lastly, friendship. I came out of Morningstar and realized, man, I just got fooled into reading a power of friendship story. And I loved it, between Darrow having to rely on his friends and friendship being what stops him from going off the deep end. With the amount of these power of friendship stories that have been made, I didn't think one of them would actually make me fall in love with these ideas, but here we are. Genuinely great. So that's it. When it's all said and done, this trilogy, despite my issues, overall has been one of my favorite stories I've ever read. I grew attached to this series even more than I did to Stormlight. The closest thing I can compare my attachment to is Trails. I got absorbed and barely wanted to do anything else for 2 months. And while I am taking a break for just a bit to go back to some of the other stories I need to read, i.e. Stormlight, I started Rhythm of War the other day. It's pretty good at the moment. I cannot wait to eventually jump back into this series. I already have Iron Gold and Dark Age sitting on my shelf, and Lightbringer is on its way as the script was being written, and currently. I thought it would have been here already, but it's not. It'll be here in like an hour or so. So yeah, I genuinely love this series, and if for some reason you watch this without reading the books, I would highly recommend you do it. Especially if you want to be traumatized by Pierce Brown, which I fully expect the next 3 books will do. You would not regret picking this you would not regret picking this series up and experiencing this story. It's phenomenal. So yeah, overall, Red Rising, just as a whole, despite my issues, as a whole, was like a 10 out of 10. I loved it. And that's about it. Thank you for watching. See ya. Bye.